Over the break, I had time to rewatch my favorite show of all time, Breaking Bad. I've always thought the show depicts human deception, depravity, and tragedy so accurately, as well as being captivating and entertaining throughout. I love discussing my favorite scenes with friends, as well as reflecting on the characters and their pivotal moments. But this time through, I was working on puzzles while watching it, and a scene struck me in such a new way that I snapped up from my work, and by the end of the scene, I'm pretty sure I audibly said, "Wow." If you haven't seen this show yet, I strongly recommend, as there will be some spoilers. It is rated TVMA, so keep in mind there might be some sketchy scenes, but nowadays you can Google that sort of thing to see where it comes on and look at your puzzle during that time. The show mostly follows a high school chemistry teacher named Walter White and his former student, Jesse Pinkman, as they seek to strike it rich cooking meth. They begin by attempting to only break a few laws that don't directly harm people. However, they quickly become more and more enwrapped in crime, and as much as they try to remain moral criminals, eventually it becomes impossible, and they stoop to levels that they were afraid of. Walter kills someone within the first few episodes, and though he is upset, that does not stop him from doing it several other times. First, it's in self-defense, but later to defend Jesse and his identities. Jesse makes it a whole 3 seasons before having to commit such an act, and when he is forced to take someone's life to protect him and Walter, it leaves a much heavier impact on him. Around this time, Jesse is a recovering drug addict, and while in rehab, he speaks to other people struggling with drugs and related issues. The first time he visits rehab, before he has killed anyone, he learns that he is not alone in the correlation of drugs and other tragedies. His rehab leader opens up that he accidentally killed his own daughter from drunk driving. Jesse's immediate reaction is, "How do you not hate yourself?" To which the leader talks about the importance of accepting that tragedies happen, and when we do something wrong, we have to forgive ourselves, since there's no point in beating ourselves up about it. This is a logical outcome of some secular moral theories, since if all we have is this life, then there is no real solution to evil, and the best we can do is to arbitrarily forgive ourselves. However, Jesse is skeptical of this at first, and especially after he commits murder, he finds it harder and harder to find meaning in life anymore. He even stoops so far as to attend rehab meetings in order to sell drugs to recovering addicts. So now we get to the scene that I want to focus on. The guilt of Jesse's reasons for being at these meetings, combined with the absurdity of forgiving himself, becomes too much. He admits that he thinks the leader's advice is wishy-washy nonsense, saying maybe he does deserve to be judged by them. For someone like him to commit these acts and simply accept himself is not only unintuitive, but impossible at this stage. He confesses that he's only there to sell meth and gets the leader to admit that there are some things that can't fly there. He leaves rehab without the only cure for his guilt that he could have gotten. In today's world, we often hear about daily affirmations and the importance of self-care and acceptance. Now, these aren't necessarily bad things, but I rarely see any reason given for them. We take it as a fact that we should accept ourselves because it either makes us feel nice or gets us through hard times. But what's the objective logic of self-forgiveness? Or in Jesse's words, if you just do stuff and nothing happens, what's it all mean? If the only reason we can accept ourselves is to subjectively feel better in order to keep moving forward, then we may fall into a depressive state when our self-love is only sustained by our weak selves. So if our self-forgiveness cannot find its source in subjective feelings, then we need to look for an external cause. When our evil deeds pile up and we recognize that we actually don't have any grounds to say that this is a judgment-free zone, we have to wonder if there is a judge. The moral argument for God's existence says that we all have some semblance of the moral law, and this is difficult to give evolutionary or biological explanations for. Most people feel accountable to some principle greater than themselves, and guilt is often described as the realization that you can't undo an offense made to that principle. This is exactly how it seems that Jesse feels in the rehab scene. No matter how much you pamper yourself, it is all subjective until you make peace with that principle. So how can one make peace with this principle and have their self-acceptance mean something? Well, I was talking to my friend a few days after I watched this episode, and he was sharing his study on Acts. He said a phrase that stuck out to him was when Peter calls repentance of sins a privilege. We both agreed we rarely think of repentance as a privilege, but usually as a shameful bringing of our mistakes to God. But then I put myself in the place of the people originally hearing this message. If you don't know who the giver of the moral law is, you were stuck with no grounds for peace. When the gospel was presented to murderers and adulterers in the ancient world, they understood the point that Jesse could not grasp from Rahab. Our right standing with the one who made these principles can be achieved. Although we cannot undo our actions, we don't have to wallow in self-hatred. Not only can we be forgiven by the lawgiver, but we can be reconciled with each other and achieve that self-forgiveness. And this is all grounded in objective historical realities, not feelings that come and go. I've been reading a book on the reliability of the scriptures, and I really had forgotten just how strong the case for the empty tomb is. Sometimes I can dwell so much about beliefs and feelings of forgiveness that I forget that the people I'm reading about actually walked the earth. And the doctrines of Christianity are not all mystical ideas about philosophy and metaphysics. Paul writes that our hope hinges on Christ being risen, and the greatest wonder of the past is that there is enormous evidence for an empty tomb which we must account for. So when I feel guilty about my sins or get discouraged by self-doubt, I remember that my self-acceptance is not a feeling that I produce. In fact, I don't accept myself in the way that Jesse was urged to in Rahab. Denying ourselves, picking up our cross, and following Jesus is actually the path to true acceptance and self-care that actually matters. Because Jesus also says that whoever comes to me, I will in no wise cast out. So let us bring our full selves to him, not hiding our sin and shame. Let us recognize our privilege of repentance and self-growth through sanctification and trust in his work on our behalf. When carrying a weight of guilt and unease and trying to have it relieved by self-care grounded in feelings, eventually we collapsed under the absurdity of it. So instead, let us look to the one who took our burdens upon himself for ours, carried them into the grave, and left them there when he arose.